Thanks. Good morning, Title I coordinators. Thanks for joining us this morning for our September webinar. My name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager for the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch, and I have a colleague with me today as well.
I'm David Malonte, one of the assistant directors in the Division of School and Program Improvement.
I will get our presentation pulled up. Okay, there it is. So as always, we just have our couple little housekeeping things before we get started. If you want to submit any questions or comments during the webinar, if you're joining us on Teams, you can send those just right there in the chat. If you are joining us on the media portal, you can send those in an email to me at erin.suddeth@education.ky.gov. And as always, we do record all our webinars and post those on the Title I Documents and Resources webpage. A recap from our August webinar, we talked about the carryover waiver for 2021-22 funds, as well as the annual Title I meeting requirement for schools. On the agenda today, as always, we've got some different announcements and reminders. Another reminder about that carryover waiver request. And then we're going to talk about discussing the School Family Compact during parent conferences, as well as an overview of the comparability report and some common comparability report issues. So first, our announcements and reminders. First of all, thank you to everyone who attended our statewide federal programs training last week. We had a really great turnout and we saw a lot of really positive feedback in the feedback survey. So it sounds like that was really beneficial to a lot of people. I know it was a little overwhelming too, but hopefully you learned some really good stuff there. As the fiscal year 2023 applications are being returned in GMAP, be sure that you're taking a look at the feedback that consultants are providing on that consolidated checklist and addressing all of those items prior to resubmitting. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff on there. It can be really easy to overlook something, but that will help avoid your application being sent back again as not approved. And as always, just a reminder that we do review applications in the order in which they are submitted. And of course, we have a lot that have been coming in now, so it might take a little bit longer than usual to get that reviewed. But all of the programs, I can tell you, are working very diligently to get those reviewed and returned to you as soon as possible. Don't forget to check the status of your previous year's applications in GMAP and make any revisions and resubmit those as necessary. So we did share this information during the August webinar for the carryover waiver request. If you are interested in requesting a carryover waiver for last year, 21-22 year funds, you need to do that no later than September 30th. So that's tomorrow. In order to request that waiver, you need to send an email to David, and that email needs to include the following information. Request that your district wants to waive the 15% carryover limitation for 21-22 school year funds, a reason for that excess carryover, and a plan for effectively using carryover funds. Okay, discussing the school family compact during parent conferences. We did have an article about this in the September newsletter, but this requirement is a very common finding during our monitoring visits, so it's definitely worth discussing. So Section 1116D2A of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, requires that the compact be discussed as it relates to each child's individual achievement at elementary level parent-teacher conferences. It does stipulate that this needs to occur at least annually. So this is a school level requirement, and it's the responsibility of the district coordinator to share this information with principals at Title I schools. So what you may want to do after the webinar is maybe send them this PowerPoint, and once the webinar link is posted, maybe send them a link to the webinar and have them watch this portion of them. That could help in reviewing the information with them. Now, ESSA doesn't specify when this conference has to take place. However, we recommend that you do this in the fall to really help establish guidelines for the rest of the school year. That's kind of the whole purpose of the compact. So what does it mean to discuss the compact as it relates to each child's individual achievement? We're going to get into that a little bit on the next slide. So sometimes during monitoring, we get some examples of the compact being shared with parents during conferences, but not actually being discussed. So I want you to think back to that ESSA requirement on the previous slide. The compact must be discussed as it relates to each child's individual student achievement. So when I think about sharing the compact with parents, I think of it as an introduction. This is the first time during the school year that the parent is seeing the compact. It should really, like I said previously, occur at the beginning of the year. So thinking back to last month's webinar, the annual meeting is a perfect time to introduce parents to documents like the compact and the policy. It doesn't need to occur in a one-on-one setting. So for example, if a school is using a PowerPoint or some sort of presentation during their annual meeting, they might add some slides on there about the policy, some slides about the compact. When the compact is initially shared, there may be some clarifying questions that need to be addressed for parents. And this is just really setting the expectations for all of the parties, parents, teachers, principal, students for the rest of the school year. So this is the point at which stakeholders will sign the compact. So just to contrast the idea of sharing the compact with parents, when I think about discussing the compact, I think of it as a progress check-in. So when we shared it, that's where each party went through and they agreed to certain responsibilities. And now that we're going to discuss it, we're in a one-on-one setting with the parent, and we can determine if everybody is kind of holding up their end of the bargain in terms of responsibilities. So at the conference, the teacher will review the child's academic progress with the parent and then look to the compact to potentially provide some next steps to address any areas where the child may need support. So for example, let's say that there's an issue with the child not submitting their homework on time. We could look at the compact and see if everyone is doing their part in relation to homework. So is the teacher posting the homework assignment in the appropriate place where they said they would? Is it on the whiteboard? Is it posted online or whatever? Is the student taking note of that assignment? Are they writing it down in their agenda or whatever the process is for the class? And then is the parent checking in with their child about homework completion as part of their daily routine? Now, the compact can also be discussed in terms of strengths and successes. This discussion is going to depend on each child and their achievement, and it may provide stakeholders with some next steps. When we talk about how to document that this discussion takes place, we just have a couple suggestions that may help you have some strong documentation that this discussion took place. So first up is an invitation to the conference that includes a reference to the compact discussion. So a lot of times we'll see there's a flyer about the conference, social media posts, emails, etc. But all it does is announce that parent conference night is coming, gives them the date and things like that. It doesn't have any information about what's going to be discussed. That wouldn't be strong documentation because we can't confirm that the compact was going to be discussed. So maybe if that flyer or that post had a brief agenda, it could help meet that requirement. So for example, it might say, dear parents, please sign up for an available time slot for parent-teacher conference night. Each conference will include the following, and one of those items would be a discussion of your child's academic performance and how the compact can support your child in their success. Next, maybe a reminder email to teachers regarding how to discuss the compact during conferences. Similarly to the invitation, an email that just says, hey, don't forget to talk about the compact during conferences isn't really a clear indication of what's being discussed. So we want that reminder to be a little bit more detailed, especially if this is something that maybe hasn't been happening like it should. And so teachers don't have it in their mind to talk about it like that. A reminder would be really helpful. Another idea would be something like a checklist that the teachers could reference during the conference, and it's got the different discussion points on there. And this is something that we saw, I think, a few times during our most recent monitoring season. So the schools just had a kind of a checklist to ensure that the teachers covered specific information during the conferences. And again, the checklist was more detailed in terms of the specific way that the compact should be discussed with the parents. The last suggestion is a parent sign-in sheet with some sort of indication that the compact was discussed. So maybe next to the parent's signature, there's a little checkbox where they indicate that, yep, we talked about these things, and one of them is the compact in relation to their student. So these are just a couple suggestions. The compact discussion could be documented in other ways. If anybody's got what they think is a really great way of documenting, you want to, put that in the chat or something, feel free to do that. Or email it to me and I'll share it with everyone if you'd like. So be sure to check in with your schools and ask what type of documentation they're saving for meeting this requirement. So now we're going to move on and talk about the comparability report. This is something that we do every year, but I know that we do have quite a few new coordinators this year. So for a lot of you, this might be your first experience with the comparability report. And this is a requirement in ESSA, it's section 1118C, and the requirement states that districts must demonstrate that services provided in Title I served schools are comparable to those provided in non-Title I schools prior to the expenditure of Title I funds. So what our goal is just ensuring that Title I money is being used to supplement the educational experiences of disadvantaged youth. In Kentucky, we complete the comparability report workbook every October, and it's uploaded into GMAP for KDE approval. The information in the report must be taken between the last day of the second school month and October 31st of the current school year. And I do want to point out that a school month is considered 20 teaching days, sorry. So for most districts, this window is going to be September 30th, which is tomorrow, and October 31st. But if your district started particularly early, you might have a slightly larger window there. The comparability report for the 22-23 school year is due November 1st. The report's always due sometime on or around November 1st for those of you who are new to this process. So just a couple reminders about the report. You can find this report in the GMAP district document library, the same place for those of you who upload your equitable services consultation packets for private schools, same place. So what you'll do is go to that document library. If you've never been there, it's over on the left-hand menu of GMAP. Go to District Document Library, and I've got a little bit of a screenshot here to try to show you what it looks like. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but you'll go to the 22-23 folders. There'll be one for Title I Comparability Report. Go ahead and expand that. And then next to it, there will be a link that says Edit Documents. So you click that link, and then it will take you to a new page that kind of looks like this picture here on the right. And you'll see at the very bottom, it says Document Template, and there is a link there, and that's the most current version of the comparability report. Now, this is a very large file, so it might take a little bit longer to download than other files. Don't worry, it is downloading. And it's also a macro-enabled spreadsheet. It's got a lot of formulas and things where the pages talk to each other. So be sure that when you open it and go to save it, you click Enable Content at the top of the page to make sure that all the different parts of the spreadsheet work accordingly. We do ask that you save the file with the following naming convention. We always put the school year, then your district name, and just the abbreviation comp rep. We try to have it be a consistent naming convention for all the district, makes it a little bit easier on us. And make sure that you're using the template for the current school year, not one from a previous school year. When it comes to completing your comparability report, we do have several step-by-step resources to help you in the completion of the report. So we've got the comparability guide, as well as a training video, and both of those are linked on the Title I Part A Documents and Resources webpage and in the PowerPoint that was sent to you this morning. And as always, your consultant is available to answer any questions that you might have. So what districts need to do when they're completing the report is use the enrollment summary report from Infinite Campus for each school and the pathway to get to that in Infinite Campus. You'll go to student information and then reports. That's the information you're going to use to complete the enrollment portion of the spreadsheet. I want to point out that when we select districts for monitoring, whether that's desk monitoring or consolidated monitoring, we do ask that you provide the documentation that supports your comparability report. You don't have to turn this into us on the front end, but we will check it in the event of monitoring. So a couple of things that we're going to be looking for right offhand for those reports. We're going to make sure that the date on the report matches what you put on the spreadsheet and that it's in that window between the last day of the second school month and October 31st. And of course, a day that students were in school, not a Saturday or something. You may need to try several different days in order to find one in which all the schools are comparable. So if you try to complete the report and you're getting a couple schools that aren't comparable, first thing we're going to recommend you do is try data from a different day. Now, once you determine which date you're going to use, be sure to save that summary report that you use to complete the report in the event you're selected for monitoring. I know you can go back and pull it later in Infinite Campus. What we've seen sometimes in monitoring is, say you pull the data for that day, that morning, and you do the report and everything checks out. Then later on in the day, maybe some enrollment numbers change, students enroll, students leave, whatever, and now it's not comparable. So when you go to pull that documentation for us for monitoring, it's not comparable, and you probably don't remember what happened all the way back in October. We also have a comparability report checklist to verify the accuracy of the report. Now, this is found in two places. There's one posted on the web page, which I have linked here, and then there's also a checklist tab within that Excel workbook. The one inside the Excel workbook, that is for KDE staff to complete. You do not need to complete anything on that page. That's what we use to make sure that everything is where it should be. So when I decided to talk about comparability in this month's webinar, I reached out to all of our consultants and asked if they could remember any common issues that they saw during last year's comparability report season. So we're going to talk about each of these briefly. And remember that guidance document and the training video have much more in-depth explanations of this whole process. So the first one, like I said on the previous slide, is enabling macros when you first open that file. The next one is grouping schools correctly by both grade level and size of the school. So if you're looking at the comparability report guide, this is going to be on pages 4 and 5 of the guide. If a district doesn't have schools with overlapping grade spans, grouping by grade is very straightforward. When there is overlap, you'll need to look at which groups share the most grade levels in common. So for example, let's say that a district has some K through 5 schools, some 6 through 8 schools, and one K through 6 school. What we're going to do with that K through 6 school is we're going to put it with the K through 5 schools because it has more grades in common with the K through 5 schools than it does with the 6 through 8 schools. Schools are also grouped by enrollment size, just between small or large. Um, there is no set number that constitutes small versus large. So the rule of thumb is that if the largest school has 2 times the enrollment of the smallest school, then that's how we differentiate between small and large. For the schools that fall in between, they're not, probably all going to come out to be exactly twice the size or more. So for those schools that fall in between, the district just needs to place those in the size grouping they deem most appropriate. And the important thing there is to be consistent with that process. Some of our larger districts kind of set like a cutoff number when they're doing the size grouping. Be sure that you're including the correct staff. So on the comparability report, if you've never done it before, you put in the enrollment number, and then you put in the FTE, full-time equivalency, staff counts for state and locally funded instructional staff members, as well as those who assist or supervise instructional staff members at each school. If you've got any federally funded staff, they are not going to be reflected on the comparability report. Any itinerant staff who maybe work at multiple schools, you would want to prorate and determine the FTE for each school and divide that out accordingly. And you're not going to include any non-instructional staff in these counts. So any clerical workers, cafeteria, janitorial staff, they will not be included. Next reminder is to reference your GMAP school eligibility page to determine the poverty ranking of schools. So in some instances, Title I schools are compared to non-Title I schools. Now, in other instances, maybe all of the schools in a grade span or all the schools in the district are served by Title I, in which case we compare the lower poverty Title I schools to the higher poverty Title I schools. So in that scenario, you want to refer to the poverty ranking of schools within the GMAP application. And this is the page that your consultant will check to verify that schools have been grouped by poverty accordingly. And if schools aren't comparable using the student to staff ratio data for any day within that window, we will work with you to determine comparability based on a salary ratio. But I think using the enrollment and staffing is a little bit easier. So we do try to see if we can get it done that way first. Documentation for your comparability report, I kind of already went over this. I mentioned if you're selected for monitoring, you will need to submit documentation that supports the approved comparability report. Obviously, the report itself is going to be a piece of documentation, but we can already access that in GMAP. You won't have to resubmit that to us. But there are some other items that are not uploaded into GMAP that you want to save. So I already mentioned the enrollment summary reports for all schools and making sure that the date and the data on those reports aligns with what is in your spreadsheet. Next is the staffing list for all schools. So this doesn't have to be the district staffing spreadsheets from HR. Those, I think if you're not an HR person, can be, I know for me, a little overwhelming. So it might be easier to just create a very simple table for each school that lists all of the instructional staff and a breakdown of how they're paid. Let's say here's the staff member, here's a column for state and local funds, and here's a column for federal funds, and we've got the FTEs in each column. That would be sufficient documentation for us. So we just want to make sure that these lists clearly document the FTE of state and locally funded instructional staff at each school. All right, that is all the information I have. Do we have any questions about any of that? I'm going to check the email.
Nothing in the chat so far.
All right. And I don't see anything on email either. Of course, if you think of something afterwards, feel free to send an email. So our upcoming webinar dates, next month, we will be meeting on October 27th from 10 to 11 a.m. as always. And we always like to remind everybody at the end of the webinar that we're always looking for more information about what's helpful for you as coordinators, what you'd like to see more of in our webinars, our newsletters, things like that. So if you want to submit any comments, ideas, or questions, we do have an anonymous webinar feedback survey that is always available in our newsletter, so you can fill that out. Of course, you can also just email those ideas to us as well. I think I have, oh, we do have a question in the chat. Does anyone have a checklist for teachers for the compact? So if anybody has that checklist, if you want to put that in the chat right now, or if you want to email me afterwards, and when I send out the email saying that the webinar has been posted, if you'd like, I can include that information, have them contact you, or include the checklist, whatever you prefer. All right, and I don't see any other questions, so I will go ahead and let you get back to your day. Thank you all for joining us today.